My name is Trey Taylor, and I thought I understood love, trust, and the meaning of commitment. My wife, Jody, real name Yodel, though she preferred the nickname, was someone I'd cherished since high school. We were each other's firsts, lost our innocence together before prom, and married shortly after graduation. She was the center of my world, the person who could still make me smile with a simple thought, even as I sat sipping coffee at my work desk. Life wasn't perfect, but we had a rhythm, a bond one thought was unshakable. That assumption shattered one day with a single phone call. An unfamiliar voice introduced himself as Michael Hamilton, one of Jody's co-workers. He had called to warn me about something I never expected to hear. My wife was planning a romantic evening with another man. She had apparently rationalized this as harmless, believing our deep history would make it acceptable. But for me, the very idea was a betrayal of the vows we made and the life we built together. Confused and shaken, I reflected on my childhood, particularly my mother's suffering due to my father's infidelity and drinking. Those memories stirred something deep inside me, a determination to never tolerate the kind of pain my mother endured. Faced with the possibility of Jody's betrayal, I knew I had to act. But what could I do with only the word of a stranger? That day, I found myself outside Spike's, a bar where Michael Hamilton, the man who had called me, asked to meet. Though skeptical and unsure of his intentions, I decided to go, desperate for answers. He arrived as promised, a composed man in a gray suit and blue tie. His story unraveled everything I thought I knew about my wife. He claimed Jody had been unusually close with a coworker named Stan Morrison. Their daily lunches had evolved into a public flirtation, culminating in plans for an intimate night at the Hilton. Hamilton explained how Jody believed that her history with me, being her only serious relationship, made this act of exploration harmless. She didn't think it would hurt our marriage. As I listened, waves of disbelief and anger washed over me. Hamilton's words hit a nerve. He spoke of his own experience with infidelity, his wife leaving him for another man, and how the legal and emotional fallout had devastated his life. He didn't want me to suffer the same fate. As I walked away, I couldn't shake the weight of what I'd heard. It sounded outrageous, yet the details aligned too perfectly with the nagging doubts that had been creeping into my mind. Recent changes in Jody's behavior, the unexplained errands, her distant tone, her almost forced cheerfulness, suddenly made sense. Whether this man was telling the truth or exaggerating, I couldn't ignore the possibility that my wife might be unfaithful. That evening, I took the first step to uncover the truth and hired a private investigator. It felt surreal, sitting in his dim office and explaining my suspicions. The investigator listened without judgment, then assured me he would gather the evidence I needed. Leaving his office, I wrestled with my emotions. Could I trust the word of a stranger over my wife's? Could I forgive her if what Hamilton said turned out to be true? The questions gnawed at me as I drove home. When I walked through the door, Jody greeted me like any other evening. She smiled, asked about my day, and moved about the house as if everything were normal. I responded in kind, masking the turmoil inside me. Dinner was quiet but strained. I couldn't look at her without wondering if she was hiding something. Later, as she retired to bed early, I stayed up, pacing the living room. Every moment she'd spent away from me replayed in my mind. By the time I finally went to bed, the only thing I was certain of was that I couldn't ignore this. The investigator's report arrived sooner than expected. Jody's actions over the next 2 days left little room for doubt. She spent hours shopping, clothes, shoes, even lingerie. She was preparing for her night with Stan. On Friday morning, she left the house carrying an overnight bag, claiming she was meeting co-workers. Her voice was light, almost carefree, as if she truly believed there was nothing wrong. While Jody was putting the finishing touches on her plans, I was making my own. That afternoon, I met with a divorce attorney. It was the first time I'd spoken those words aloud. I need to file for divorce. The attorney listened carefully as I explained the situation, then laid out my options. She emphasized the importance of evidence to avoid complications later. I passed everything I'd learned from Hamilton and the investigator to her. As I left her office, the weight of the day settled on me. The path forward felt inevitable. By Friday evening, the investigator delivered a package containing everything I needed. The photos and video recordings confirmed it all. Jody and Stan had kissed in our driveway before heading to the Hilton. Inside the hotel, they shared champagne, held hands, and eventually disappeared into an elevator together. Watching the footage felt like being stabbed in slow motion. This wasn't just a mistake, it was a choice. A deliberate betrayal. That night, I sat alone in our house. It felt hollow, no longer a home. The silence was oppressive, but I refused to turn on the TV or music. I needed to feel the full weight of what had happened. When Jody returned the next morning, I was waiting. She looked cheerful, like someone who had enjoyed a pleasant evening out. It was as though nothing had changed for her. But everything had changed for me. When Jody returned home, she stepped through the door as though it were any other day. Her ease was jarring. I couldn't reconcile the woman in the recordings, the one who kissed another man and walked into a hotel room with him, with the cheerful wife now unpacking her bag. She looked at me, perhaps sensing my tension, but carried on as though nothing had happened. I felt a cold resolve as I watched her. The truth was out, and there was no turning back. Over the next few days, I dismantled the life we had shared. I packed her belongings into boxes and placed them in the garage. I changed the locks, ensuring she couldn't walk back in. When she returned later that week, she found herself locked out. She knocked, then banged on the door, calling my name, but I didn't open it. She pleaded, demanded, even cried, but I stayed firm. I told her through the door that her betrayal had ended our marriage. She had made her choice, and now I was making mine. The following weeks were surreal. My lawyer filed the divorce papers, and Jody was served at her office. According to Michael Hamilton, the scene was dramatic. She fainted, collapsing in front of her coworkers, and was rushed to the hospital. I felt a pang of guilt when I heard, but it quickly passed. Her choices had brought her here, not mine. Jody tried to reach out, but I ignored her calls and messages. Her parents and sister, Judy, also tried to intervene, calling me cold-hearted and unforgiving. Judy even showed up at my door, accusing me of overreacting and demanding answers. I told her the truth. Jody hadn't been honest, not with me and not with them. Judy was shocked but didn't argue further. Later, she confirmed Jody had admitted everything but insisted the night hadn't gone as planned, that she'd gotten too drunk and backed out of sleeping with Stan. It didn't matter to me. The betrayal had already taken root long before they'd booked the hotel room. My mind often drifted to memories of my childhood, watching my mother endure years of my father's infidelity. I thought about her strength in finally leaving him and how life had improved for both of us afterward. I refused to let Jody's actions reduce me to the kind of despair my mother had suffered. I needed to move forward, even if that meant starting over alone. In the midst of the chaos, I focused on work. Selling RVs gave me a temporary reprieve from the emotional weight I carried. One particular sale to an older couple, the Jacobsons, stood out. They had been married for nearly 50 years, and their easy companionship reminded me of the kind of love I once thought I had with Jody. As I handed them the keys to their new motorhome, they thanked me warmly, their joy contagious. For a brief moment, I felt a spark of hope, a reminder that not all relationships ended in betrayal. That hope was tested again when Jody unexpectedly showed up at my workplace. She wanted to talk, but I refused. I was done listening to excuses or apologies. She looked thinner, her eyes tired, but I didn't let myself feel pity. This was the path she had chosen, and I wasn't going to let her pull me back into the mess she had created. As the divorce process dragged on, more revelations surfaced. Jody had continued seeing Stan even after leaving our home, further confirming that reconciliation was impossible. Her attempts to justify her actions fell flat, and her parents began to accept that our marriage was truly over. Judy, however, remained conflicted, caught between loyalty to her sister and understanding my position. It didn't matter. My decision was final. The final blow came when my investigator revealed a video of Jody and Stan sharing an intimate moment at a hotel, proof that her claims of innocence were lies. During a legal meeting with her lawyer, I played the footage. Jody's pale face and silence told me everything I needed to know. Her lawyer quickly shifted tactics, discussing settlement terms rather than denying the infidelity. For me, the marriage had ended long before the papers were signed. The person I had once loved was now a stranger, and I realized the only way forward was to leave her, and everything she represented, behind. The day the divorce was finalized, I sat alone in my house, a place that felt more like a shell than a home. Jody was officially out of my life, though echoes of her betrayal lingered. The silence was heavy, but for the first time in weeks, it carried a strange sense of peace. The battle was over, and I had done what I needed to protect myself. I couldn't undo the past, but I could begin to shape my future. I focused on rebuilding, throwing myself into work and reconnecting with parts of myself I had neglected during the turmoil. The Jacobsons, whose RV purchase had been a small bright spot in the chaos, reached out again. Mr. Jacobson had suffered a health scare, and they needed someone to drive their motorhome back to Houston. I volunteered, glad for the distraction. The journey was exhausting but offered clarity. Watching their love and support for each other reminded me of what I deserved, what I would no longer settle for less than. Back home, I began to embrace the simplicity of single life. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. My anger toward Jody faded, replaced by indifference. She had made her choices, and I had made mine. I even found unexpected moments of humor in her absence. Judy informed me that Jody and Stan had broken up after a violent argument, one that left Jody hospitalized and Stan in jail. It was a dark twist, but I felt no satisfaction, only a detached sense of finality. Despite everything, I found myself opening up to the possibility of a new connection. The Jacobsons' granddaughter, Darla, someone I had initially dismissed as difficult and aloof, surprised me. Over time, her sharp edges softened, revealing someone who, like me, was grappling with her own challenges. We shared quiet meals and unexpected laughs. Slowly, without realizing it, I began to feel something I hadn't felt in a long time: hope. The wounds Jody left were deep, but they no longer defined me. I was ready to move forward, to leave the pain behind and rediscover who I was. The journey wouldn't be easy, but for the first time in months, I felt like it was one I could handle. If you enjoyed this story or found value in its lessons, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to my YouTube channel for more compelling narratives and insights. Thank you for your support.